today's agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda. Okay. Yes, I approve that too.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, the agenda has been approved. And then can I get a motion to approve the November 2023 meeting minutes? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? No. And that motion carries as well. Is there any public comment today?
Not yet.
Okay, the next item is our bond project updates, and that's Jill and Chloe.
It's all same time. So for the affordable housing bond, just a couple of updates. So the Lakeshore Mills project, which is one of our bond funded projects, recently went to the Board of Commissioners and their allocation was increased by about $300,000. This was sort of a carryover situation from earlier in the year, from in the fall, and they needed that last little chunk of money to be able to close the project, and so the commissioners considered that and decided to move forward with it. When I made this slide, we were thinking they were going to close at the end of the month. It looks like it actually might be pushed out a little bit further. Last night I presented at the Board of Commissioners. We had the Housing Authority who is issuing the bonds for this project, not the GO bonds, but the 4% low-income housing tax credit bonds. And so they had to come to the commissioners, ask for permission to do that, and then they're going to have to go to the local government commission. So it's just pushing things out a little bit further. So we suspect they may close in May now. And then for we are currently reviewing affordable housing services program applications for fiscal year 25. The other two bond funded projects, Maribel and Redwood Commons, actually submitted applications for fiscal year 25, and so they are going to be considered for additional funding and to be able to utilize the fiscal year 25 guidelines. You may remember last time that I talked about how the Affordable Housing Committee was considering allowing property tax exemption in this new generation of projects, and so Maribel and Redwood Commons could potentially benefit from that if they are a nonprofit. Well, Redwood Commons is nonprofit. Maribel potentially is considering bringing on a nonprofit partner to utilize that property tax exemption and help to close their gap. And then there are also some new projects that the Board of Commissioners is going to consider. The Affordable Housing Committees will consider those first at their April 16th meeting, and then will make funding recommendations at their April 23rd meeting, including the source. And so we'll know more about which projects would receive bond funding at the April 23rd meeting. And then all of those recommendations then go to the Board of Commissioners in early May, and the final funding decisions are wrapped into the budget approval process, and those funds can be accessed July 1, 2024. So just to be consistent with our updates, we have allocated 35% of the affordable housing bond so far, and 65% is remaining.
Can I, just for my ignorance, all these acronyms, what is BOC?
Board of Commissioners.
HAHC?
Affordable Housing Committee.
And the AHSP?
Affordable Housing Services Program.
Okay, because I work in finance, so all those things mean something different.
Yeah, we can create like a little acronym. Sounds like something in our annual report. Yeah, we can make sure those are all explained. Just easier to put it all on the slide that way. Some of those are pretty long.
So in terms of the money that is committed,
yes.
The Lakeshore is included in that, Lakeshore Villas.
Yes, that is Lakeshore Villas, Redwood Commons, and Maribel.
Okay, they're all in that. Okay.
Yeah, and so the affordable housing bond is a multi-year fund, and so it's different than our other affordable housing projects that are funded through the general fund. They don't have to like be tied to a specific year, but just for our purposes, if Maribel and Redwood Commons would become fiscal year 25 projects, whereas Redwood Commons would remain fiscal year 24, just so that we keep that straight. Any other questions?
Okay, so for open space bond, the last time we met, there was only one project that had been approved to receive bond funding, and that was the Woodfin Greenway. Since that meeting, 2 conservation easement projects have also been approved, and they are the Parham Fortner Farm and the Lake Eden Preserve. Parham Fortner Farm is a total of $150,000 of bond funds, and that protects about 30 acres of farmland in the Sandy Bush area. That came to the bond funds through our farmland preservation program. That's under our Ag and Land Services Department. And then the Lake Eden Preserve, it came through our Land Conservation Advisory Board program. That property is in the Swananoa area and includes about 336 acres. So for $250,000 to protect that large of a plot is a pretty good deal, and it's a pretty high conservation value space as well. Some of you might be familiar with the Leaf Festival. That is where the Leaf Festival takes place, at that Lake Eden Preserve. So it's also a cultural asset as well. And then again, the total additional allocation from the open space bond is $400,000. So you can see in the chart over to the right that we have approximately just under $2 million total allocated in open space bond funds, or about 6% of the total funds, which gives us $28 million remaining. Just a note that the additional Greenway funds for the Inca Heritage Trail will be part of that 28. So we're currently we're in the middle of the application process for passive recreation lands, and that will be part of that 28 million as well. To give you a sense of where things are with that piece, we have our deadline for applications on March 31st, and then we will be moving into project review and selection. We have a scoring committee of staff that will review all of the proposals and score them against our evaluation criteria. And then we have a subcommittee of community members that will review those scores, dig a little deeper into the projects, and make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. Right now, our timeline has that recommendation going before the commissioners in August. And so we should have that list of approved projects should be somewhat longer in August of this year. To give a sense of when we'll start spending money, we don't expect to be spending the Woodfin Greenway money until 2025. Parham Fortner and Lake Eden should both close around early spring 2025. And then the passive recreation lands, when that money is spent, will depend on the projects themselves and the distribution schedule that we outline with those recipients once they are selected. So we have roughly 2 million allocated, but haven't spent anything yet.
Is there a target amount that you're thinking to spend on the passive recreation lands, or it doesn't depend on just what comes through?
It depends on what comes through. We are not assigning a targeted amount for that application window. We want to be able to fund the projects that best align with the goals of the bond. So it could be, around 10 million, it could be more than 10 million, it could be less than 10 million. And depending on the applications that we receive, there may be a need to do another application window in the future. I will say currently we have about 12 to 15 expected applications coming through that window. So there is a lot of demand for the passive rec funds and a lot of competition. I don't know all of the price tags for those projects, but they range from about 80,000 to about 2 million. So it's a pretty wide range. But ultimately what ends up getting funded will come out of that project review and selection process and what the commissioners vote to approve in August.
Is Lake Eden considered flood zone?
I don't believe it's considered flood zone. There are some critical like streams and waterways on that property though, so that's part of the conservation value, and it also includes 3 ridges, which and how we determine like this or how we score conservation projects also scores pretty high for being a high conservation value. Explain. Any other open space fund updates questions? All right, as you guys may remember, this committee, as part of your resolution, is to put together an annual report that will be presented to the Board of Commissioners. Obviously, the staff will help write that report, but I have put together an outline, or we put together an outline of what we think makes sense to include in that annual report. And we wanted to get y'all's feedback, if there's things that are missing, if you think some of this is superfluous. This outline is really based on how other committees in the county who have annual reports, how we tend to structure those. Since this report is covering the first year for this committee, we wanted to use this as an opportunity to first talk about the purpose of the bonds and how they came to be, but then really get to the purpose of this committee, how will include the resolution that established this committee in that section, and then talk about how there's these specific roles that committee members are supposed to fill. We also have a financing flow chart that was requested by this committee that I'll pass to Matt after I walk through the outline, and he can share that with you guys and walk through it. So that's the introduction. We'll then talk about committee administration. This is just the logistics that you all know. So we'll have your names of the committee appointees. We will also talk about who is the staff liaison for this committee, which has been me and Chloe for this year. Strategy innovation moving forward, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. And then we'll have your meeting schedule and how that aligns with the kind of financial milestones in the county that we discussed. Then we'll talk about the process. So for this committee, the process will really be that in this annual report moving forward, that's where we will talk about any issues that you have flagged and how the funding has been spent. It's not in this report because no money has been spent yet, but in the future, there will be money spent, and you all will have the ability to review how the funding has been allocated and how it's been spent and flag if there's any issues that arise. And that flag, that discussion around those flags will end up in the annual report, and then you will vote hopefully to approve your own report, and it'll go to the commissioners, and they'll be able to see the concerns that you raised and decide what they want to do about it. And then we'll also include in this first annual report just a disclaimer of the fact that no funding has been spent yet, so there's nothing to approve yet. And then finally, we always like to include accomplishments in these annual reports, and you guys have obviously adopted your bylaws and selected a chair and vice chair. You've also been instrumental in helping create that transparency dashboard, so we will include those in the report as well. And then finally, we'll just have a looking ahead of those projects that have been approved, those 3 from the open space bond and 3 from affordable housing, and we can talk about expected expenditures in FY25 as well. That's a lot of information I just threw at you in that annual report outline, but I do want to pause if you guys have feedback, if you have questions, or open the floor.
And I can scroll back up just to make sure you all can see the text.
So as I kind of mentioned already, for this first report, we really want to use it to like lay the groundwork of the process and kind of put that in writing. In the future, this annual report will have the findings of this subcommittee and like those flags that you want to say. So it'll be probably a lot meatier, and there'll be more discussion about what you want to include in it. But if you have additional things that you want to include in this one or things you want to remove, you obviously have the prerogative to do so.
So as we discuss things in this meeting, and as we flag issues, it's only going to the commissioners in the annual report.
That is the process that legal has.
We're going to take good notes and remember, y'all.
Well, that's what the hands-on for, right? But yeah, we'll take good notes. We have been. Well, then we can pull up the finance flow chart that you also really asked for, and let Matt walk us through the start.
Good, you're excited. And obviously, this is a give you feedback as you will, any clarification points we need to add, we can. But I do recognize I need to change this for some ADA. Maybe we change the colors or make one. So I'll start at the top.
Can you make this bigger?
It's probably can zoom in, I guess, with the zoom kind of limits the screen size. I'm not.
Do you want me to run some printed copies?
I was gonna see if I could
Yeah. That's better. Thank you.
We can start, and then when Rachel comes back with copies, I can reiterate anything. So the first 3 bullet points. So what we're trying to show here is there's a critical point where we take a fork. But for the most part, what happens is county leadership determines a need for a bond referendum. Remember, these GO bonds have to go to a vote for the public. A bond referendum happens, right, in November, and then voters approve. So that's where we've been. And then after that happens, we then have amounts that we have, and we have 40 million for affordable housing and 30 million for open space. Staff work on approving, you've heard Jill and you've heard Chloe talk about their different subcommittees. So we're working through that. We're working on developing what the projects are, what the budgets amounts will be. Those go to the Board of Commissioners for approval. And then next what happens is finance staff and budget staff, some other folks, we determine what our cash needs are. So what that means is, do we have enough cash to fund some of the projects now, or do we need cash? Let's start with if we need cash. So if we need cash, we work with the state. Remember that the local government commission, or the LGC, is this like overarching body that really dictates all that we can do here in the government debt world. We work with the state to issue the bonds. Then when we sell the bonds, we go to the market, we sell the bonds, we call those bond proceeds. So we receive the bond proceeds. That allows us to have funding to actually start the projects and track spending. And the tracking of the spending is important. And yeah, so right here, start projects and track spending. And float on down, left and down. So then what happens is we track projects. In the meantime, we're paying debt service. Obviously, these are major projects that get amortized over 20 years. So through the 20 years, we're paying debt service. As projects are completed, they're put on our books and they're taken off our books. And then the end zone is the funds are assessed. And what I mean by that is they're audited throughout this whole process. We have you all as another auditing source. So then let's back up. If you all have any questions so far. So that's if we need cash up front.
I do, I have one question for you,
Yeah.
2 related questions.
Yeah.
If you decide cash is needed, how long does the process take to then work with the state to issue the bonds and basically receive the money so you can start using that?
Great question. So what happens is we work with our financial advisor, who happens to be a company called Davenport.
Okay.
So we work with Davenport. We also work with a bond attorney. We happen to use Parker Poe out of Raleigh. So we work with both those partners. Then we work with some other folks, such as underwriters and I guess other bond counsel. and we get on calls with the state, like we legitimately get on phone calls with the state, we pick a date to actually sell the bonds. We submit a fairly lengthy application that proves that we were able to pay back the bonds. In this case, general obligation bonds are full, the taxing power of the county, so those are generally okay, right? So, and then what happens is the LGC gives us a date. Local government commission holds local government commission meetings. Folks go and we either present over the phone or sometimes present in person. Our sell date is in the second week of May for the GO bond, as I'll get to later. And then GO bonds are interesting because they work on a competitive side, meaning underwriters when they come in to price bonds. The state actually kind of handles that for us. It's kind of like an RFQ process. They will solicit different underwriters to see who gets the best rates, and we sell bonds.
I think the shortest timeline is probably 4 months, and that's moving quickly from the time that we engaged with the state. But we gave them a heads up, obviously, last year, the last couple of years, we've been talking about this for a long time.
Yeah, I think we contacted the state. We made an application, over half a year ago. We had a first legitimate call with the state. I believe it was in the wintertime. And then meantime, while this is all going on, we have credit rating agencies come out and assess our ability to pay our bonds back. We actually had them on site Monday and yesterday, and then we have another rating agency on site next Monday. So, does that answer your question?
It does, and then reverse it. Another one that was related. And do the projects themselves get money, or do they have to wait until the bond proceeds are actually received?
So that's a good question. And let's use that as the pivot point, go down the next area.
Okay.
So what can happen is, what we really need to happen legally for that is the Board of Commissioners has to approve the budget, right? And you've heard Jill and Chloe talk about the projects which are already approved budget-wise by the commissioners. So once we have that information, we don't need the proceeds if we have cash available. Now we're going down the flow chart. So if we have cash available in our bank to what we call a float or to front the money, we then have to do this other legal action on top of all sorts of other legal actions called a reimbursement resolution, which basically is an IRS mechanism that says that we promise to pay, we're going to use bond proceeds in the future to pay back some expenses we've already spent. That's essentially what that is. And then it kind of follows the same trajectory there. We start the projects, we track the costs. We then really pay attention to how far are the projects along in their cycle, right? So like how much money have we actually spent? Do we have contracts? The LGC really likes to see that we have a really good plan in place before we go issue debt. So we would be tracking our contracts. If we get to a good point where we feel like we have sufficient runway, we then go back to what I was just talking about with working with the state to issue bonds. And then we receive the bond proceeds, we pay ourselves back, and that's really the only difference, right? Then we're going back into that. We're paying debt service over 20 years, projects are getting completed, going off the books, and then audits are happening, and then this committee's happening. So you all will see the sale of all these bonds, but then of course, they're going to be on our books for years, the debt service. So it's really, do we have cash now? Do we need cash? That really sets us on our trajectory. And I imagine it will be for our GO bonds, the 40 to 30 million. It's going to be a combination of both of these ideas. So, and we've got future slides coming up about talking about actually where we are in the debt process. So.
And if the cash is available, I understand the phases here. It's, correct me if I'm wrong on this, it's possible that you won't even go to the state to issue bonds for all that funding. Is that true or no?
So we've earmarked this $30 to $40 million to be GO bonds, so we will go out.
Oh, they'll all go out.
It's just the thing is, it's a timing.
Yes.
We're really just concerned with timing. We will just be able to hit the ground running quicker.
Yeah.
Because we have the money in the bank to be able
That's
to do
really
so. But the thing is, y'all, these are affordable housing, and open space comes with a pretty high price tag, right? And they're complicated projects.
Yeah.
So I do think that we'll be able to float some of them, but probably not all of them. Okay. Yeah. But that's really the general census of like how we would go about doing debt. And this really follows in line with, except for the whole bond referendum and the voters approving. That's how our normal debt works anyway. So we're following a very familiar cycle for issuing debt.
Where in the, you guys jump in if other people have questions, but I'll make this my last one. where in here, and I imagine it's kind of at the end, is it determined if property tax needs to be increased, and if you are gonna go to that?
It's gonna be in the, really that assessment stage early on. But remember, this $70 million is part of a huge pot of money, and so we try to assess all of it, right? Like, we can make it work without raising the tax rate, we will, but, you know, we did put a publication out there that said we could raise the tax rate, so, we're not there yet.
So it's that funds assessed.
Yeah.
Block includes, you know, basically.
Absolutely, and it's gonna be project by project, right? So, we just happen to have 3 out of the gate with affordable housing, and then 2 out of the gate with open space, but. That's a good question, though, because we look at affordability, you know, like that, and we look at that as how much can we float without having to raise the tax rate, look at capacity, like what can we do? And then liquidity, of course, is what I've been talking about, if we need cash or if we have cash available, so.
And of course, that's the question, if your feelers out to the general public, that's what people want to know.
Absolutely, and I get that too, you know,
Yeah,
it's out there, so, absolutely.
What Jill and Chloe have been showing y'all then, so like to pull this back to the front of the presentation, is the budgetary conversation. So how is the work actually being approved to get done, right? So we can't spend any money unless the budget is approved. So are things happening? That's the progress that you see in the percentage committed or allocated. And then the cash flow, the ability to continue operation is our kind of trigger point where we can talk about the property tax rate to manage.
Yeah. And just for uber clarity, general fund, right? General fund's floating the money. And whenever I say floating the money, it's the general fund. It's kind of strong. And as you all, you know, as we're developing this report, you all have ideas about how we can make this better, just reach out.
So what is the process from here on developing the annual report?
So we will be working with James to take this outline and draft it into an annual report. And that draft will be shared with all of you at your July meeting. Well, I shared with you before the July meeting so that you have time to review it and come up with questions and comments and things. And then at that July meeting, you'll be able to make any of those changes and provide that feedback, and then ideally vote to approve it so that it can go to.
So all the changes are gonna happen at the July meeting.
I mean, I think you can share your changes over email or whatnot before that July meeting, but the committee will have to vote on like the final report that goes to the commissioners. So I'll let James, who will probably be overseeing that process. He won't have a comment on it now, but we'll probably figure out exactly what that looks like. And if you guys have thoughts on what would work best for you, we'll work with him to make sure there's a way that you guys can see the report, have time to review it, make your comments, get those implemented, and then in July, I will be able to review a final version and go to upgrade.
I guess I'm trying to figure out how much we can do over email.
Just don't
you
reply
can't.
all.
Yeah, you can't reply all.
But you guys can email.
You cannot reply all. That is.
Okay.
But you can say like, I was reading a report and I saw this error or I saw this thing and I wanted greater clarification in the draft. Can we add some more clarification? You know, whatever.
So all of our changes will be individual. And we won't see everyone else's until July.
I would think that is the way that we're making, that's because this committee does meet quarterly. I mean, we could also extend like the time of the July meeting to be longer to give more time to discuss those changes and,
Did you put special meeting language in the bylaws?
Yeah.
Y'all can pull a special meeting together.
yeah,
before
but you could
July.
also do another meeting if you wanted to before
We
July.
could do
or
like a
after.
virtual meeting. We could potentially meet virtually and just review the draft together.
Are there certain things that we could say that would trigger that? Like, do we have to decide that now?
You don't
If
have
we
to
all look
decide
at
that
it,
now.
and each of us have a whole bunch of changes.
You don't
I don't anticipate that this year.
Not this year, or maybe.
You don't have to decide that now. So in the past, I've had my other subcommittee that I manage, like we realized there was a need for a special meeting after we'd already had our last one. And so, I think one person might have initially expressed the idea to me over email, and then I reached out to the committee and asked people for support, and they said yes, and then we established a special committee. There are like rules we have to follow around notifying the public about a special meeting, but that's on staff.
What you should do is, if you all are thinking about it, you're feeling good, you're in there cranking away comments, send them to James, let James compile all those comments, and James will let you know if it gets so significant that we need to pull a meeting together before July. That way we're not teetering on any ledge of meeting loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
But you can call a meeting, a special meeting at any time, the chairperson or any three members of this committee. Call
Yeah.
a meeting, a special meeting at any time.
The law is just that we have to give the public 48 hours notice. You can technically call one for, but no, please, but you
So it sounds like, so definitely no reply, only reply changes to James.
Yes.
And if you see enough in there that you disagree with or think we need to talk about, can they reach out just to me?
I mean, they can reach out just to you, but they
Just
can't
to
reply all.
just to ask for the special meeting.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm the one that can trigger that, right?
They just can't, again, reply, like, we can't have more than, I think it's 2 of you in a conversation at a time without it being public, so, yeah, just email directly.
Does that work for everybody? Do we all follow that?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can also create a timeline of like when to expect a draft, and then ideally when to get your comments to us, so that you have that ahead of time. That's good. Okay, so Matt's gonna share a finance update as well.
I'm gonna share some of this with me.
Okay.
So,
Finance folks are gonna do some updating.
So we did commit to providing an update on our audit process. So this would be coverage for fiscal year 23, which ended as of June 30th of last year. First bullet, I would say that we had a successful first year with a new auditor, Mullen & Jenkins. There are a few things here. For success, generally means that we completed it, and we had an unmodified or opinion, which is the highest standard of audit and internal feedback that you are expecting. This was our first year with a new auditor following a competitive selection process last year and 5 years with our previous auditor, CLA. Generally in a first year audit, our new auditor is going to dig a little deeper, ask them more questions, spend more time with us than they might in future years as they get to know the organization. And I think things went really well. They asked all those questions. They've been highly responsive, great communicators. We think we're all on the same page. They've proven great expertise to us in the area of local government and specifically in this region. Mullen & Jenkins is a large regional firm covering the Southeast. So they do a lot of work specifically with local governments and local governments in North Carolina, public authorities and things like that. So they know our work. They've taught us some things. They've stood beside us and behind us on some things. So we really appreciate that. Moving to the next point, there were no findings related to the GEO bond funds for those discussions. We did have one finding. An audit finding is a communication that is required from the auditors by auditing standards. That is a notification of lack of compliance or internal control, but really from the perspective of generally accepted accounting principles. So it's a very specific and technical thing. We have conversations with them, and they issue findings when they have to. Otherwise, it is a publicly issued communication to management, but it's not as formal as the thing that is a finding. We did have one finding in this audit, and it was related to our management of opioid settlement funds, which might be a thing that you've heard about. And that's interesting because the finding was based on guidance we had received from the state of North Carolina and our previous auditor. So that was a discussion. But Mullen & Jenkins, again, that's our specific example of them proving their expertise, kind of partnering with the state and getting some adjustments and clarifications to that for us. So again, we really, really appreciate the work that they did with us last year. We also have a corrective action in place as is required in response to all findings. So we've been in touch with the LGC and the state as appropriate. commission, there's nothing that was found in the audit that should lead to concern or insecurity. As regards, there's not a whole lot of activity, as you all have heard, with the GEO bond funds, right? So you can go to our annual comprehensive financial report, and in one of those 200 plus pages, there are several that are very specific to these bond funds. There was less than, I think, $50,000 worth of activity last year. A whole lot of movement hasn't started yet, but something that really does matter about the audit, we were later than we hoped to be, so we missed our original deadline and had to extend, and those were kind of some circumstances beyond our control. But the state does prefer that we have our audit complete at least 60 days prior to issuing debt. We did close and present our final audit report to our board of commissioners on January 16th. And like Matt said, we're going out to sell our bonds. So we have plenty of time, and the LGC has no concerns about our audits from that perspective. Are there any questions about that process?
Loving the closed captions that said the state of Arizona.
That's where I do most of them.
So we piggybacked some slides that we had. You all heard me talk about the bond process. Part of that bond process is various resolutions have to be drafted and presented to our board of commissioners in order for us to actually be able to issue the bonds. What's going on here, you're going to see in this next slide, and the slide after, we're doing the GEO bond sale in conjunction with a limited obligation bond sale. So limited obligation bonds are normal debt the county goes through every 2 years. It just made sense to kind of pull all the resources together where we had the teams that we work with to just go ahead and get on LGC's calendar for both the LOBs and then the GEO bond. I think one's the 14th and one's the 16th of May. Anyway, what we're thinking with the GEO bonds is I've been working diligently with Jill and Chloe. We've been trying to figure out this whole, we've been analyzing where we think we're going to be as far as cash needs, right? Like, so yes, we've adopted some project budgets, but what does that actually mean with cash going out the door? Remember, we're worried about that cash piece. And what we've determined is, even though early on in the process, when we initially contacted LGC for these GEO bonds, we always go with these not to exceed amounts. So when we're going through our application, we're working through resolutions, and the not to exceed amount in this case was 17.2 million, which represented the project's budgets that Jill and Chloe had mentioned before. But what we're finding out is the open space stuff just really isn't far along enough yet for us to issue debt in May. Where we float the cash on one side, we also don't want to sit on bond proceeds for too long without actually having something to spend on. So all that to say, it does look like we're going to go in May and actually be able to sell the $13.9-ish million of affordable housing bonds. We think we're going to be able to spend that money or start spending that money at the end of this calendar year. And not too far into the next fiscal year, so it makes sense for us just to go ahead and take advantage of the market right now. That's a thing we think about, like where a rate's going to be now and in the future. Obviously, we can't predict the future, but they're pretty good right now. So we're going to go ahead and do that. On the right, you can't read those, but those are, it's just an amortization. It's just showing what principal and interest will be. Any questions on this so far?
I'll call out on the bottom left. So Matt mentioned we have a meeting with our credit rating agencies. We talked about it at the very beginning of this committee. Buncombe County currently does have the highest credit rating for both agencies, which were rated so AAA. S&P and Moody's, we're adding another rating agency starting next week to the discussion. But what that means is, also in really small letters, is when we do our planning, we assume that we will have to pay up to 5% interest on the bonds that we issue. Right now, we're looking at a real rate that's more something like 3.3%, which is huge savings. The other part of that is we do have the opportunity to earn interest on the cash that we hold in the way of bond proceeds. Y'all have seen the rates, so there's like a lot of great earning going on right now that's going to offset a lot of our interest. So we're really kind of in a sweet spot right now. Things will obviously change as we look to get to the next round of issuing bonds and get to the dance, but this is kind of the picture to us.
And if you guys really want to nerd out, we issue taxable bonds or non-taxable bonds, right? So we typically think of government bonds being something we want because there's no income tax on it, right? So the way that we've structured some of these projects, there's going to be a pretty large private component. So we are anticipating when we issue the affordable housing bonds in May, they're going to be taxable, which will result in us paying a higher interest rate. The interest rate still isn't incredibly high because we maintain a really good credit rating. So, and hopefully we maintain it. They were just here and they're going to write a report. So feel pretty good about it. Fingers crossed. So I think that's good on that slide. Unless y'all have questions. Really just in the weeds there. Probably too much information. And then the next slide shows we keep a debt policy in the county. Some of it's informed by legal limits set by the state, but some of it's mostly driven by the fact we want to just be good, better at business, good finance managers. What this was is these were charts presented to our Board of Commissioners that showed the impact of both the GO bonds and the limited obligation bonds I mentioned before. And all you really need to know here is we're doing really well. We are way under the limits. So if you look at the top right, that is a limit, that red line, we're way underneath it. So, and then same with the lower left, and then this 10-year payout ratio just says that we're gonna make sure we amortize the way we're paying 10 years off of time. It's really convoluted stuff. Very happy to share the policy with you all if y'all want some good nighttime reading. But all this says is don't worry, we're good. So.
And then did you say the debt issuance is just once a year in May? Like, will it?
Well, not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah, so think about, remember we determine when we need the cash, right?
Yes.
If we have the cash or we don't. So that's really going to inform, that's going to be one side of it. Also, when are the rates good? Like, when we anticipate rates are going to be good. So we don't want to go to the market if the rates are really high. That wouldn't make sense. We've seen historically, I don't want to say high or low because depending on how you're looking at it, rates right now are wild across the board, right? Like mortgage rates are really high, and then we're seeing our lobs rate currently be pretty significantly low, like in the 2s and 3s. So now's a good time to go. And then let's say we come across next year, we've got some significant spending finally on the conservation stuff, open space stuff. We'll reevaluate. If rates are weird, we're not going to do anything. We've got cash to help us get through it. But it's kind of like a multi-pronged process. It's not just a set it and forget it. Mason and I have always joked, because it's been somewhat true, we've typically gone to the market every 2 years. But of course, with introducing the GO bonds into the equation, the need's a little bit greater, right? So we might have to go every once a year. But we spend a lot of time, it's a lot of work every time we go to the market. So like literally we spend a lot of time, staff time. So hopefully we can find a good cadence. Great question. And this is just kind of an timeline of upcoming key events. The good news, and this includes both GEO and LOBS, and I know you probably can't read that, I'm sorry, but really all you need to know is in April, we're going to go to the Board of Commissioners and they're going to adopt some resolutions for us to be able to sell the bonds in May. That's really the gist of it. We did a lot of the legal work with the GEO bonds up front, right? So that voter piece really covers a lot of what we need, right? That's the authority. But with the LOBS deal, we're having to go back to the Board of Commissioners and they're having to adopt this resolution, that resolution, et cetera, et cetera. So all you need to know is we're going back in April. A thing called an issuance resolution that has a lot of legal jargon in it. And then, of course, sell the bonds in May. So this is a fun update. I'll take this if y'all want. We've been chatting with our bond counsel, and we have determined it is not the best use of funds to pay for staff with GO bond money. And that is hinging on federal tax laws and some state bond laws. It's been a really rough situation. We've been trying to navigate that. Happy to talk about that as much as you want, but all you need to know is that this committee's staying. James is going to come on board. He's going to help take over the stuff that Jill and Chloe have worked on, and the work's getting distributed across the county. So. We're currently trying to find if there's the time that Jill and Chloe have spent working, if we can use some of that time and pay for it with bonds. But as I mentioned before, non-taxable and taxable, there's all sorts of different laws. This is the decision the county's made to date. We are currently still walking through this, but it's looking pretty prominent. This is where we're headed. So this may be the last time you see Jill and Chloe in this capacity.
So when we looked at previous expenses that include their salaries,
it's only just their salaries. And so what's probably going to end up happening, it's not definitive, Most of that's gonna go into the general fund. But what that does mean on the other side is it's gonna open up a little bit more funding for more projects. Because we have budgeted the full salaries for them for 7 years.
We also didn't mention the dashboard, it's in the works. Our other, you may remember Matt Baker, he has been pulled into another role, so his time has kind of been distributed. And so he's gonna be sending a link to the final dashboard, and so you all saw a version that had the salaries being pulled, so it'll look a little different once we send the final version of that.
There are steps being taken to keep these two around, all right?
We're working through it. Nothing, obviously, we're not decision makers in this room. However, I know the three of us, we've worked a lot together. We're working through it.
James, tell us your last name and where you live in the whole picture.
Happy to. I'm James Shelton. I work in the strategy and innovation department here at Buncombe County. Matt Baker is my direct supervisor, so he's the fellow who's building the dashboard for y'all.
Okay.
So I've got a lot of experience working with dashboards. Before I came to the county, I worked for the Department of Housing and Urban Development for 6 years. So I have a lot of experience working with multifamily housing development. I managed a multi-million-dollar portfolio of HUD finance projects when I worked for HUD. I'm a data analyst by trade, but I love affordable housing, and I also appreciate how these projects come together. So I look forward to supporting this committee and the work that y'all do. And I'm kind of a resource, just as Chloe and Jill have been, that you can come to, ask me any questions that you have. I'll be happy to answer as I'm able. But nice, James Shelton. Nice to meet you.
So moving forward, your staff.
That is correct.
Yeah, we'll send her his email.
That'll be more formalized as of July 1st, I believe, is the actual date. Chloe and Jill will be working with me in kind of a handoff process over the next couple months.
Sorry, it's my son.
Okay, so the next part was just basically talking about James.
Oh, well, there you go. That was the question I was asking.
So, as we kind of mentioned before, the next meeting's not till July, which is why this is the last one that we'll be managing, but James will be taking over from that meeting onwards. So, and in that meeting, kind of the draft agenda that we proposed is we'll talk about that annual report draft that's being developed, and then any updates about the projects that have been approved will also give it. Just to note, I know we have open space project selection on there, but as I talked about the timeline before, that decision won't be made until August, so there will not actually be an update about passing rec projects in July.
Oh, yeah.
But the affordable housing projects for fiscal year 25 will be selected and funded by July 2nd, so we can update all those. So the last part was about community questions.
The dashboard's not up and running yet.
Correct, no.
As soon as Matt Baker sends us, I don't know if he'll send it direct to us first or if he sends it directly to you guys, but he's working on it and he'll get you guys a link as soon as possible. But definitely before July, hopefully, so that we can include that as an accomplishment in your annual report.
And the website there's a really big backlog in our IT department with website updates, and so that hasn't been updated either. I remember last time we went over the landing page with different content that would be on there, and so that's in the works as well. So the dashboard might be embedded somewhere else temporarily until the website is updated. Any questions? questions, comments before we move it over to you for adjournment?
Anything else? Do we have to vote on adjournment? Oh, it's pretty, I'm sorry, it's gonna be that. Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? Okay.